Landlord tax breaks are skyrocketing. So landlords are claiming billions and billions of dollars in tax deductions, which means lost revenue for Australia. All the while, they're jacking up rents at ridiculous levels. So renters get the privilege of higher rents and absolutely no tax deductions they can claim on. I'm Biko Konstantinos, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Please like this video to help me to spread the message, and if you'd like to be kept up to date on the financial stuff that affects your lives from Australia and around the world, consider subscribing to my channel. That will help me improve my content so I can provide you with more value. Now let's check out these tax breaks. I'm going to start with a Financial Review article from Michael Reed. Landlord tax breaks will be the fastest growing source of lost revenue over the next 4 years as rising interest rates push more real estate speculators to make use of negative gearing. The Australian Labor Party has recently released the Treasury's annual tax benchmarks and variation statement, which for the first time includes the value of rental property deductions, which were estimated to have generated $18 billion in lost revenue for 21-22 financial year. This year, that figure is expected to increase by 35% to $24 billion, thanks to higher interest rates, which are tax deductible if you're a landlord. So the total amount of lost revenue from rental property deductions over the 4-year forward estimates is $100 billion. Now we're in the middle of a rental and housing affordability crisis, so just imagine how much social housing could be developed with $100 billion. It's a lot, and it would help. So negative gearing occurs when the cost of interest and expenses linked to owning a rental is more than the income it generates each year. So with any investment that's designed to produce income, you can always reduce the income you receive by all your expenses before determining your taxable income. So if your rental made $20,000 for the year, but the cost of interest and expenses on that rental were also $20,000, then you'd have zero income to declare and therefore not pay any tax on that rental income. And that's fine because you had all those expenses. But the issue is when your interest and expenses is more than the rental income you receive, that means the property is negatively geared, or in other words, losing money. You're allowed to take that loss, say it was $10,000, and reduce your personal income from wages so that you pay less personal income tax. So you pay no tax on your rental income, you get tax back on your personal income, and all the while your investment property is appreciating massively in value due to all these generous housing policies that create so much demand. House prices always go up. So now that we've had 9 interest rate rises in a row, with more expected over the coming months, many more rental properties will become negatively geared because the cost of interest payments on the loan is increasing exponentially. But what's one of the absolute worst things about negative gearing? Someone on the top income tax bracket is more than 3 times more likely to be a negatively geared landlord as opposed to someone who has an income of less than $90,000. So the large majority of these taxation benefits are going to those who are already on a super high taxable income. There's something wrong with that picture. So rental deductions are set to increase, but even they won't come close to the revenue lost from exempting the family home from capital gains tax. The lost tax from this exemption totaled $59 billion in 21-22, but is projected to total $168 billion over the next 4 years. The main residence capital gains tax exemption is designed to encourage people to buy their own home and not be penalized if they sell and move. So no matter how much your principal place of residence rises, you don't pay a single cent on capital gains tax. Now, the International Monetary Fund is not a fan of this exemption. The IMF has urged the government to wind back capital gains tax breaks for the family home. The IMF states that this is a very expensive tax exemption that disproportionately benefits wealthy households. And I tend to agree. It's the overall fairness of this tax exemption that I have a problem with. And the reason I have a problem is that houses are no longer affordable. So that means people who can afford a home or who bought a home when they were much more affordable are generally making around 10% capital gain on that property every single year. That 10% capital gain is something like $80,000 or $100,000, and that's all tax-free. So that's how the wealth gap keeps getting bigger and bigger. You've got someone with their own property making $80,000 to $100,000 gain on their personal property each year, while a person who can't afford a property makes no gain. And guess what else? They're not eligible for any generous tax deductions. So that's my problem. And you've got the extremely wealthy who have made capital gains on their personal property of maybe 10 or 20 million, and they still pay no capital gains tax? How is a renter ever supposed to compete with someone who's able to utilize and benefit from these extremely generous housing tax policies? And guess what these generous housing policies do? They create so much demand for property that house prices rise so much faster than wages, so each year it becomes harder and harder for someone to afford their first property. And that, my friends, is a tragedy. The IMF feels that the 100% tax exemption on your principal place of residence is more generous than what's seen in other advanced economies. And they're not saying to do away with it completely, but to make it less generous, to make the overall tax system fairer. And I agree. The other massive housing tax break in Australia is the 50% capital gains tax discount. So if you've held an investment property for over 12 months, the amount of capital gains tax payable is reduced by 50%, or in other words, halved. This concession amounted to $17 billion in 21-22 and is forecast to cost around $55 billion over the next 4 years. Mark Burris, mortgage broker and former Celebrity Apprentice host, says that negative gearing and capital gains tax deductions on property investments are bad policies. Mark states that these policies get people to buy real estate for the wrong reason. You're basically buying the investment property for the tax breaks and for the knowledge that there's so much demand that prices are basically guaranteed to go up. And the Grattan Institute also agrees. As per their Orange Book 2022, the Grattan Institute recommends to reduce the capital gains tax discount and abolish negative gearing. This would have the effect of reducing overall demand for housing in Australia, which would reduce some of the volatility and speculation that goes into housing, and that would be an amazing result for many Australians who currently feel like they'll never be able to afford their own home. And it's those hard-working Australians that I would love to see be able to own their own home, which has always been the great Australian dream, but lately has turned into more of a nightmare. But if you get rid of negative gearing, rents are going to go through the roof. That's what many people always say when you try and talk about abolishing negative gearing. But the Grattan Institute states that if you did overhaul these taxation deductions, rents wouldn't change much and the housing market wouldn't collapse. And I agree. The majority of advanced economies across the world don't have housing policies that are as generous as ours are in Australia, like negative gearing, but their rents aren't through the roof, and neither would ours be. Like I mentioned, if overall demand was reduced, house prices wouldn't rise as fast, which means they might slowly become more affordable and more renters would be able to afford their own home. So it might mean that home ownership levels might start to increase again, and that would be a great result. So in Australia, we've got some of the most generous housing taxation policies in the world, and over the coming years, they're going to cost the federal budget billions and billions of dollars. Apart from costing so much, these tax breaks increase the inequity between property owners and non-property owners in Australia. And as a result, renters in Australia are left out in the cold because they aren't able to take advantage of these generous tax breaks. So let's finally overhaul these ridiculously generous housing policies, save billions of dollars, and use that money to improve housing affordability by building more social housing and things like that. Let's restructure our policies so that they work for all Australians, whether you currently own a property or not. I'm Biko Konstantinos.